Well, good morning, you wonderful people. Boy, oh boy, have I ever missed you guys. It's great to see you this weekend. And you sound good too. Great worship time. Well, I want to take a couple moments before we dive into Bible study and thread you into some things. The main thing I want to say is a big thank you to our weekend teaching team, because we journeyed through a series that we called in July, August, Encounters, and really the Gospels. And we looked at moment after moment where ordinary people like you and me touch Jesus and were forever changed. And so really an encouraging time. I grew this summer as I journeyed with our teaching team through Bible study on weekends. And so I just want to say a thank you to those men and women and what they do so well and so faithfully. Now, before we continue, a little update. So I do have a pretty significant surgery on Wednesday. They fixed the left shoulder and all the bones and so forth in June. And now in September, we're going after the right shoulder. They're reattaching 3 muscles to the bone is what they're doing. So you're going to have the one-arm pastor for a while. But there's nothing wrong with my heart or my head or my mouth. So we're in good shape. But yeah, I guess it's going to be a month or two before I have any sort of even minimal ability to use my right arm. And this is my good arm, by the way. And then I guess a year for full recovery. But I'm a young guy. I got the whole life ahead of me, and I want to be able to carry all my grandkids, so I got to get my muscles back going again. So anyhow, I will be teaching this whole series that we're beginning this weekend, 7 weekends. We're calling it Faith at Work. Faith at Work, and I'll talk to you more about that momentarily. Now, in spite of your best efforts, I did fall off my bike, which happens all the time. People fall off stuff. What do you do if you're a winner when you fall off something in life? You always get back on. So in spite of your best efforts, I'm going to get back on my bicycle. Maybe a little wiser. I don't know if you've seen the police report from forensics. Here's what the picture looked like. And it was a rough day in my life. It's really painful for me to look at. Now listen. Okay, you listening? That is not me. I'm telling you this because last time I showed that a few months ago, people got on social media and they're writing this. OMG, my pastor crashed into a tree. It's not me. That's actually my wife, Carrie, and she had a bit, no, I'm just kidding you. So that's not me. I just want you to know that. I'm just telling you straight up front. I'm gonna get back on my bike, and by the way, here's another insight. When you're on a bike, can you stay in a stationary pose? No, you can't. How do you keep your balance on a bike? You keep on pedaling. Isn't that a great parallel application for life? So you fall off, dust off your bumps and bruises, get back on the bike, and start pedaling, or you'll lose your balance entirely. And so I want to thank you guys for your encouragement, I think cleverly disguised as humor, because over these last couple months, I have received from you I think it's fair to say scores, if not a few hundred, email links and stuff advertising stationary bicycles. I want to thank you guys for that. I received more than a few actual training wheels. Appreciate that encouragement. I've received whole wraps of bubble wrap. Some of you are thinking I had to spend the rest of my life in bubble wrap. Might be an improvement. I don't know. And then it's not just you guys, though. It's our own pastoral staff. I actually pay these people. They have been calling me for 2.5 months, Pastor T-Rex, because my arms were frozen here. Hey, there's Pastor T-Rex. How you doing, Tyrannosaurus Rex? And I'm like, just shut up and itch my nose, will you? I can't reach my nose. And so we've had a good time, and I love those guys. And remember, the fallback position is there's always payback, and I'm already working on that. All right, enough of that shenanigan. Let's talk about something that matters. And what matters is our Bible study together. This weekend, the rewards of human labor. So, I don't know how many of you play the lottery. I don't want to know. Keep that to yourself. But let's just hypothetically suppose you do, or an average American, and if they won the multi-million-dollar grand prize, say you won a couple $100 million. This is pretty much a conglomerate of what most Americans would say were they to hit the big time and win the lottery. They'd say something along the lines, if I won a couple $100 million, first thing I'd do is buy a brand new car, killer loaded. I would pay off my house, I would quit my job, and they wrap it up with this, and I would never have to work another day for the rest of my life, unquote. Does that sound like anybody you know? Isn't that pretty much close to truth? Now, I'm not getting after anybody. I'm just simply saying that's kind of our default setting as Americans. Not all, but most. Like, the working part of our life stinks. When can we hit the jackpot of early retirement or win lotto and retire, never have to work another day in our lives? It's sort of every working person's dream. They sip that beverage on a Chase lounge, on an exotic Caribbean beach. The idea is, that's what I'd like to do with the rest of my life. Nothing. Really? Nothing? Now, I realize we have people in various stages of spiritual journey, so some of you are considering who Jesus is, considering the relevance of the Bible. For those of you that actually have sort of signed on, if you've signed on and begun relationship with Christ, then the implications are you and I have to rethink how we're already thinking about or assuming what our daily labor means, our career, our vocation, our marketplace experience. Because when we lay down our heads and die, that's going to be about 2/3 of our lives. And so many people are simply waiting to get to the other side when they don't have to work anymore. Now, there's a lot of different ways that people approach working life in American culture. Some see it as a necessary evil, and that the only purpose to sort of endure the rigors of a work week is that you can land a work-less weekend, which is party time. Or some people are thinking about early retirement, and they lay in bed at night doing math and strategizing. Some people approach work as God is inflicting human labor on the human race as punishment for the original sin. And it's kind of divine retribution payback. I will show you puny little beings, you cannot do that. Here, take that, I'm gonna make you work 50 years. And some people kind of approach it that way, and it's an endurance contest. The net result is one day we turn around, we're old, we're retired, we cannot work anymore. Our life is nearly done, and we're filled with profound regret. Happens all the time. I'm a pastor. I do funerals. I see people at the end of their days often. Here's the problem. The Bible does not teach a grim view of work. The Bible does not teach that. The Bible teaches, beginning in Genesis 1, which is to say the first chapter of the whole Bible, the Bible teaches that God blessed and loved the first woman and man and assigned them meaningful tasks in caring for the garden. Do you know that work existed before the fall? Adam and Eve were deeply engaged in meaningful labor and fruitful toil in the garden, pruning and maintaining and tending and caring for, even before sin entered the picture. God gave them dominion over all the earth as a form of favor and blessing, not, as so many assume, as a curse and as a punishment. So we're going to talk about this in life at work, living for God on the job, and thinking about leveraging kingdom influence in the marketplace. What are we going to do with the best 2/3 of our lives? How our faith intersects with our daily labor. What are the implications of that? Now, for those of you that do hate your job or grimly endure your job, there are several things at stake. Can I just say to you, dude to dude, or just dude to fellow human being, I want to say to you, if you just hate what you're doing and you're just grumpy about it all the time, you're getting older and gravity happens. So I'm saying to you, you got to do one of two things. No kidding now. You've got to change your attitude or you got to change your job. Now, if there's a third option out there, I don't know what it is, so help me. At the end of the service, email me or something. But I'm simply saying, change your attitude. And I do mean literally, change your job. You don't want to turn up 70 years old one day having regretted and vastly underlived your potential in life. I don't think we want to live that way, do we? And so now is our moment where we can invest the best years of our life in meaningful toil and labor. And we can begin to look at work through a biblical lens and build a God-honoring worldview. So I'm saying to you with love in my heart, thus saith your pastor, quit hating your job. And let's rethink how we think about the marketplace. There is one other thing at stake, and it's the little people that live in your house. Don't look at me in that tone of voice, you made them. and they are watching you. Remember, with children, it's not what's taught, it's what's caught. In other words, the power of a life lived before them. So I'm just asking you the question. I don't want you to feel guilty. I am asking all of us, beginning with myself, to do courageous inventory. Ask yourself the question, what are my kids hearing at the end of a typical workday out of my mouth and from the aura of my attitude? Are they hearing job stinks and my boss is a jerk and the traffic's horrible and everybody's in my way and it's pointless and I'm not being paid enough money and it's grim drudgery? Or are they hearing a hopeful parent, a grateful parent, a parent of appreciation, a parent that's calm and centered and really in a good place in life and about their daily labor? Because you and I are setting up our children's futures and their whole work life as well. Remember, the power of life and death is where? Power of life and death is in the tongue. Okay, let's pivot to the Bible. I want you to join me in the book of Ecclesiastes. You have it on the notes. You have a hard copy option when you came in, or you can access digitally on YouVersion and access our notes that way. We're in the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. I'm not going to ask how many of you have ever actually given meaningful time to reading through and studying Ecclesiastes. I don't want to put you in the awkward position of lying in church. So let me tell you a little bit about Ecclesiastes. God used a guy named Solomon so that this book would be recorded. Yeah, that's Solomon the son of David, so we're talking 2,500 years ago or so. And while circumstances and human culture have changed, the soul and spirit of man has not changed. And Solomon, in some sense, is the original wise guy. In fact, Ecclesiastes references him as the teacher. And so what we're bumping into as we read this together is how to live a well-lived life from Solomon's own example. Now, you're looking at me thinking, these Bible guys, they all live such sort of flawless, unattainable lives. I'll never get there. Wrong, I'm gonging you. Solomon has probably got the most significant mess-ups in the Bible. I mean, when the dude sinned, his sins were whoppers. So he inherits all of this spiritual legacy and overlapping blessing from his father David's life, who also was not a perfect man. And as a young man, Solomon begins his reign. His father's handed him the kingdom and everything he'd need to succeed wildly. And mostly Solomon fleshed out. And he compromised spiritually in every other way in his life. You know, one wife to share a life wasn't good enough. He needed 300. And even 300 wives didn't satisfy all of his needs, evidently. So he got 700 concubines additionally. Now, if you look historically, wives and concubines, as evil a system as it was, and it's evil, because women were largely property, and that is evil, any human being being in that context. But that's the way it was back in the day, and often used for political leverage and other kinds of things. So now we're seeing Solomon toward the end of his life, and you know what the dude has done? He's come full circle. And so it's in that context that we're reading of a young man who began with so much promise, and now he's saying, listen, do what I'm asking you to do. Don't do what I did, because I did dumb. I did bad stuff. I was really adrift. If there's a dominant word in Ecclesiastes, it's the word meaningless. And Solomon kind of harps on this. He says life and everything in life is meaningless, 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 unless you approach all the treasures of life through a God lens, through a biblical lens, and a God-honoring worldview. And that's what we're looking about at labor. Now, one other thing I want to say about this passage as we read it. The Old Testament's patriarchal, which is to say they usually refer to an individual as a man. So here where it says, you know, a man's labor under the sun or a man at the end of his days, it doesn't mean man, male, or just purely masculinity. It means man as in mankind. So here we are seeing work interfacing with human beings, men and women together, and our ultimate purpose in this life. Have you got it? Pull it out and let's read it together, okay? Everybody in a big loud voice. I know you're caffeined up, and we are in Ecclesiastes chapter 2. Are you ready? Let's go. Begin. A man can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in his work. This too, I see, is from the hand of God. Then I realized that it is good and proper for a man to eat and drink, to find satisfaction in his toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life that God has given him, for this is his lot. Moreover, when God gives any man wealth and possessions and enables him to enjoy them, to accept his lot, to be happy in his work, this is a gift of God. He seldom reflects on the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with gladness of heart. So I commend the enjoyment of life because nothing is better for a man under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany him in his work all the days of the life that God has given him under the sun. Let's distill the essence of what the Bible just said to us. The Bible is saying that when a human being, and in particular when a believer, goes about his or her daily labor with proper motivation, then in a very real sense it can become an act of worship to God and deeply fulfilling at a soulish level. Fill this in if you would, please. Work can actually be worship. Fill that in, friends, and then look up here for just a moment. We tend to have a stilted notion of what worship is. A lot of people have an understanding of worship no larger than, hey, John, we just did it 10 minutes ago or 15 minutes ago when we were singing songs together in big church, corporate gathering of believers. That is an important expression of worship, but only one and only a small. What about the rest of our week, the rest of the hours, the rest of our lives? The case that the Bible is making here and that I'm making here is that work, when it's properly leveraged, can actually be worship. It can be done for the glory of God. It can serve our fellow mankind, and it can be profoundly internally gratifying. And not just those singing worship or not just work. How about our marriages? How about our leisure, our hobbies? That too. In other words, when we properly understand what the fully devoted life to Christ is really all about, it's all of our lives. And God accepts us, foibles, warts, and all, but it's not just that little 15-minute window once each weekend in our lives. Work can actually be worship. Now fill this in. We work, if you distill that down still further, we work to serve people. And when we serve and love people, we're in reality serving and loving Jesus. And thus, we're even more deeply affirmed and fulfilled. I said that there was an Old Testament passage. We looked at Ecclesiastes. Check out this New Testament passage. It's behind me on the LED, and we're going to read it together a couple times. This verse became really important to me at 18 years old. Came to Christ at 16. At 18, I'm now in undergraduate school at Vanguard University in Costa Mesa, SoCal, and I'm working at Texaco in the oil refineries with a bunch of lovable rascals. I love these dudes. I mean, by the way, I don't think there's anybody much younger than 30, so I'm 18. Everybody else is 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. I mean, they were a hard, cussing, smoking, chewing, girl-chasing. They were a rowdy bunch, and they had great fun, mostly at my expense, because I'm this little, peach-cheeked 18-year-old, and I've got a Bible verse in my locker. And you say, you put a Bible verse? Yeah, I needed help with these guys. And it was this verse, okay? And I'll tell you more about that momentarily. And by the way, let me just say something. There's a way to handle rowdy people far from, first of all, respect them and love them. But don't let them take you too far, because I had to pull a couple of these guys aside. I may be young, but there's a point you push me, I'm going to say, okay, now we're going to have a succumb to Jesus meeting, Buster. Get over here behind the 55-gallon drums of crude oil. And we'd have a talk and say, listen, man, just chill about what I'm doing and I'm chilling about. Let's just be friends together. And so once that happened, we did become friends, and pretty soon I'm doing their weddings and funerals. And again, I'd been a Christ follower for 2 years. I had no clue how to do a wedding or funeral. And they were too lost and dumb to know any better, so they got this 18-year-old up there. It was a shenanigan, no kidding, just a shenanigan. But I grew to love these men, and they grew to love me, and we keep in contact through the years. Let's read this verse together a couple times. Are you ready? Big, loud voice, everybody, begin. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for men. One more time, please. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for men. Do you know what a game changer this can be? It is transformational in how we approach our daily labor. And I promise you that when you and I begin to think about how to please God on the job, I guarantee you our human counterparts and colleagues are going to be wildly pleased and satisfied. Okay? So I want to redirect your focus in whom you're ultimately serving in your labor, whether you go to work later today or tomorrow or whenever. Okay, 3 rewards of human labor. Fill in the first one. The reward of increased confidence. Do you know that God hardwired us to be individual beings created in His image with confidence? And that confidence cannot ultimately begin until we're restored in relationship with the Father via the Son. Some of you are tyrannized by timidity. You have a sagging self-confidence. And one of the reasons, one of the purposes of work is that when we deploy the gifts and entrustments that God has given us in this life and we leverage them daily in honest labor, we will see in our lives an emerging new confidence. I mean, think about the last time you're at a restaurant and you have a server at your table and you just know that he or she, it's their first day on the job. Their hand kind of shakes when they're handing you the cup of coffee. They're dropping pens. They can't find their thing to write down your order. They're forgetting stuff. They're a little worried. They're kind of watching the supervisor over there. It's kind of an insecure, unsure, awkward first meal. But if you go back 1 month later, you're going to see a transformation. You'll see that same new server carrying 4 plates, schmoozing with customers, and having a whole new level of confidence. They have an internal sense of, I matter, I'm making a difference, I feel confident about what I'm doing, and therefore confident about who I am. Now, when I think of confidence, I gotta always think of the young man who worked in his first job at a grocery store. It was actually his first day on the job. He was assigned to work in the produce section of the grocery store, so the green goods department of the supermarket in his town. And he was there spraying down all the vegetables and so forth. And a woman came up and tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Good morning, young man. I'd like to buy half a head of lettuce." It's his first day on the job. He's got no clue what to tell this nice lady. So he says, "Ma'am, is that a thing? I don't even know if we can do that." She goes, "No, I want only half a head. I don't need a whole head, just half a head." He goes, "Well, I'm kind of new here, so I need to go check with my boss, my manager. So just wait here and I'll go find out the answer." So he walks all the way to the back of the store to find his boss, not noticing the lady is following along behind him all the way through the grocery store. He finds his boss in the back of the store working away, and he walks up to him and says, "Boss, excuse me, there's some old bag out there that wants to buy half a head of lettuce. What should I tell her?" Seeing the horrified look on his boss's face, he turns around and seeing the young woman the woman whom he now sees has followed him, he says, "And sir, this nice lady wants to buy the other half head of lettuce. Would that be okay with you?" Greatly relieved, the boss said, yes, and give her the other half free. She can have both halves. So the workday goes on, the lady's satisfied, the young employee is kind of strutting his stuff, and the boss finds him several hours later, stocking shelves and inventory. And the boss says, "So, young man, that was pretty impressive what you did earlier. Let me just ask you, where are you from, son?" And the boy said, "Oh, sir, I'm from Toronto, Canada, the home of beautiful hockey players and ugly people." And the manager looked at him and said, "Well, son, my wife is from Toronto, Canada." And the boy looked up at him and said, "Well, sir, what hockey team did she play for?" Confidence. Don't you wish you had that kind of awareness and presence of mind in the moment? So I hope you're taking notes if you work in the produce section of your local grocery store. Now, early on, when John and Carrie married at 20 and 22, something happened. we had a kid. I don't mean a goat, I mean a baby. Then we had another kid. Then we had another kid. Then we had another kid. Pretty soon we got 4 kids, we're in our 20s, and we're figuring out what it means to be great parents, which is a pretty comprehensive conversation. I'm just going to talk to you about a piece of it. One of the things we were both committed to is we didn't want to raise a bunch of entitled little narcissists as our own children. We wanted to raise world changers. And so we did what we recommend and the Bible teaches. We put them to work. We didn't ask them. We just let them know this is a normal part of life. They all began to work at a young age, doing everything around the house, inside, outside, cooking, laundry, scrubbing toilets, changing oil on the cars, replacing tiles on the roofs, changing anything, filters, just teaching them to work. They further began gainful employment at an early age. You're looking at me saying, John, why'd you do that? Because I wanted them to understand from an early age, life is not a free handout, and they are not welcome to live with me at 30 years of age. Secondly, I wanted them to understand they had to learn to pull their own weight and make a contribution to part of the family team. Furthermore, I want them to begin to nurture a lifelong confidence from meaningful labor. So I wanted our children to know what sweat is, to know what blisters are, and if there's some blood mingled with the sweat, I'm cool with that. I wanted them to know what legitimate fatigue is. I wanted them to know what discomfort is, how to successfully complete a job you can't stand, because that's going to come useful in the rest of life, don't you think? I wanted them to collapse in bed at night exhausted and exhilarated with a profound sense, oh God, I'm tired. But I did it! That's the sense I want them to have, a sense of confidence from honest labor. Now, you say, John, I don't know how I'd even begin this with my children. They're watching videos all the time, just endlessly, the second they get home from school. Who's the parent around here? Have you heard of unplug? And don't be grim and dour about this. It can be a positive, all-family experience. But let's teach our sons and daughters how to cultivate confidence from meaningful labor. They're going to need to know it for about the next 50 to 60 years of their lives. It's been my observation that people out of work or people who avoid work suffer with insecurity and feelings of unworthiness. And so inactivity and laziness erodes confidence. Meaningful labor establishes confidence, gives us a sense of I'm worthwhile, I've got skills, I matter, I made a contribution, I am somebody. There's a second reward of labor. Fill it in real quick, would you please? And it's the reward of deepened character. So you may have heard the illustration that character is who we are when no one's looking. And that character, in some sense, is the unwritten list of cherished convictions and values embedded in the soulish part of who we are. There are good people that think the only place you can develop character is in a Bible study in their church family. That is a place, but far from the only place. God has another character-forming place called the 9 to 5 laboratory of our lives, or whatever hours you work. And he says, it's there too, then I'm going to build character in your life. I mean, the dude that God used to write more than half the New Testament, Paul, he didn't take even his living from the ministry. He built tents on the side. He was a rugged man with calloused hands. And so the reward of deepened character is what we're talking about. So for those of you that really just do not like your job, you are stalled, you've plateaued, you've hit the wall, you're saying, I don't know if I can deal with another week of it. I want to suggest something to you that you may not have thought about. And it's this, that God probably will not change your circumstances until you change your attitude. You may be just an attitude adjustment away from a whole fresh new approach to your daily labor. And you could really probably argue that character is the accumulation of a lifetime of attitude adjustments, where we set aside our own selfish, self-serving inclinations, and then we assume, and it's not going to be easy. This stuff is simple, but it's not easy. We assume what God is saying for our best. You know the old program, Father Knows Best. He does. And so God is waiting for you to have an attitude adjustment. He loves you so much. But when you have that attitude adjustment, then he'll say, okay, that child of mine's graduated. Now I can give him a fresh new set of circumstances. Remember, we work to become, not merely to acquire. It's not just about our earning power keeping up with our yearning power. I promise you, more is not the answer. And most of our fellow citizens in this great republic truly believe that more, in fact, is the answer. Now, as I prepared this Bible study, I had a thought. I thought, what about all the jobs I had? And by the way, my parents were not the kind of parents that it was not a democracy. Like, I got to go work? Can we vote about this, Mom and Dad? And I'm thinking, okay, there's 5 kids and 2 parents. We'll outvote them. Okay, it never came to a vote, right? And so I started working young, and it was just, everybody was working in my family, so you would have been strange if you were just sitting around chilling, being lazy. So I had farm work and snow shoveling. I had a nifty little snow shoveling business and an even better lawn care business. I figured out a way, by the way, on my bike to attach a rope and haul my lawnmower all over town and cut people's lawn. It's faster than walking. It's not safe, but it was faster. I was in retail sales. I had newspaper routes. I worked for a flooring company. I was a popcorn and hot dog vendor for a minor league baseball team. I was a busboy at a restaurant. I painted for several years. I caddied for golf. I worked at a food processing plant, and I worked in an oil refinery, which I alluded to a few moments ago. When I got tired of all of that, I said, I've had it. I'm going in the ministry. And here I am, almost 40 years later. So, having said that, you're looking at me and you say, John, did you have to do all that stuff? And honestly, the answer is no, I did not. However, if I wanted to eat food in my mother and father's house, yes, I had to do that. If I wanted an actual bed to sleep in, yes, I had to do that. A nice terry cloth towel to dry off after I'd taken a shower, yes. It was expected, it was the norm, it was the oxygen we breathed. I remember my first day in work, I was about 8, and my old German grandfather, Opa, somehow he knew everybody in town, Opa did, and he got a school teacher that needed basically an ignorant, unknowing boy to help him move rocks, which at 8 or 9-year-olds felt like massive boulders, but they probably weren't bigger than a volleyball. But I was 8, so, you know. Anyhow, so I worked in sweltering sun for 2 12-hour days. I'm all cut up and bruised and bleeding, and I'll never forget the dude. Mr. Schmidt was his name. He handed me $25. It was awesome. I mean, I was overwhelmed. I ran back to my grandma and grandpa. I'm telling them, look at this. I just got $25. I was amazed. And then I did something that was also kind of built into our family. I did not spend it. I saved it. That's just what we thought about first. I mean, I might have spent $1 of it, but the rest of it, and we weren't believers, definitely didn't tithe. So now, I think what it built in me, and many of you can identify with this fully, is sort of a relentless perseverance, the ability to understand staying power, to endure. And then I remember my college years when I left home, drove across the United States, began my undergraduate work. I mentioned it in Southern California. My parents were simply unable to help me. They gave me a strong body, strong mind, and encouragement, but not dollars and cents. So I worked at Texaco, an oil refinery in Wilmington. And what I did is I got the earliest classes I could at Vanguard, so I wanted to usually get the 7:30 a.m. class. I was done with classes by 2:30, race home, because I had to start work at the refinery at 4 in the afternoon and work till midnight. Each night my job, there would be 2 60-foot semi-trucks with 2 levels of 55-gallon drums stacked on top of each other of oil and crude. And all night long, I would empty those 2 out, and then the empty trucks would drive away. And yes, it took 9 hard hours of labor to empty those 2 big trucks hauling 55-gallon drums. Tell you the truth, I was too tired to be bitter. I do distinctly remember sprinting out of my last class each day, and I'm just being very honest with you. I was probably in the minority because many of my friends would go straight from class to the beach. It's about a mile from the beach, to study at the beach. Well, I checked their grades out at the end of each semester. I'm pretty sure they were not studying. And So I don't begrudge them at all that their parents or some generous or well-endowed family member was able to resource them, but I'm simply saying that was my lot in life, and I will tell you to this day, I didn't understand it then, I fully understand it now. I could not be more grateful. So when our 4 children went after high school, I said, I will give you everything that you need, but I'm not paying your tuition, room, boards. I will pay your books. Mom and I will cover your medical insurance, and we will fly you home periodically. The rest is on you, and baby, you can do it because what are Greggs? Greggs are winners, okay? It's kind of a family thing we did. And so what about you? What's your experience like? What's your journey been like? What are we talking about here is that work can be a character finishing school for ourselves. What is God trying to accomplish in us? And also for our sons and daughters. It's a laboratory environment for character formation. Okay, let's begin to wrap. Number 3, the reward of blessed accomplishment. What did God say when in 6 days he created the heavens, the earth, the universe, and us? The Holy Godhead said, it is very good. Do you feel the accomplishment there? Even from the one that is holy, eternal, and true. It is very good, a sense of, I did it. God has given us the gift of work also that we might have a sense of accomplishment. It's like the sales or marketing person who closes the big deal after months of intense effort, and they make the deal, and they have a deep sense of accomplishment. It's like the maintenance or cleaning person who puts in an hardworking 9-hour, 10-hour shift and cleans a whole dirty building. They turn out the lights for the night knowing they left behind an immaculate building for their team members the next day. Accomplishment. It's like the teacher who gives the final lecture and submits the final grades. The farmer who combines the last row. The accountant who successfully does all of their tax returns for the year. Accomplishment, accomplishment, accomplishment. It's like the athlete who showers and drives home from the gym victorious, the architect who finishes the final drawings, the mother who puts the baby down at night, the student who completes the final exam successfully. Accomplishment, 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 accomplishment. It's like the pastor who finished the sermon and said, amen, let's stand for closing prayer. Not now, I don't really mean it. That's an illustration. Accomplishment. Truly. Why did God give us human labor? Confidence, character, accomplishment. What's happening in your world relative to these things? I want to leave us all with a challenge, and it's this. And I mean this seriously, do this. It's going to freak your supervisor out, or your direct report, your boss, or whoever it is that you work with or for or whatever. I want you to, the next time you go into work, and that might be an hour or two from now, or tomorrow or whatever, whatever your work schedule is, I want you to go to your direct report supervisor and say, hey, have you got a moment? I need to talk to you. And the first thing that's going to go through their mind is, what's the problem now? What did I do now that hurt your little feelers? Or what are you upset about now? You're going to pull them aside, and I say, listen, it's very simple what I have to say to you. I love my job, and I just wanted you to know. Thank you for my job. I appreciate working at this company. I feel blessed being part of the company and being on the premises. It gives me an opportunity to grow character and confidence and accomplishment. And sir, ma'am, I just wanted you to know I'm a grateful person. Then you're going to be going, because they will have gone unconscious. They'll have a cardiac event. Overwhelmed, because that's not usually what bosses hear or supervisors hear. They hear groaning and moaning and online slander and gossip and blah, blah, blah. What if we had an attitude transformation and we demonstrated Christ followership every day on the job, because we're now looking at our daily labor through a biblical lens and a God-honoring worldview? The teacher said, Solomon, Ecclesiastes, a person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their work each day, for this is from the hand of God. Yes, satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun, for it is a gift of God. Then joy will accompany them in their work each day, all the days of their life, that God has given them under the sun. And everyone said, would you bow your heads in prayer, please?